Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Development Diaries. This is a show where we interview leaders, innovators, change makers, movers and shakers from across the real estate development sector, learning about their career journeys, proudest moments, lessons learned along the way, and advice to their younger you. We also find out what excites them most about the real estate sector right now. I'm your host, John Guest, founder of Henry James Search and the Rebels Community, a group of good humans in real estate who come together to move the industry forward and challenge the status quo. On this episode of Development Diaries, I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Smales, founder and CEO of Human Nature, a sustainable community-focused developer and the company behind Phoenix, a 685-home sustainable neighbourhood in Lewes, amongst various other projects. Jonathan had a fantastic career, former managing director of Greenpeace, who oversaw the organization's rapid growth in size and influence during the 1980s. He was then CEO of the Earth Centre for a decade before setting up a consultancy to advise on a sustainable regeneration and housing for several years prior to setting up Human Nature in 2017. Jonathan, welcome to Development Diaries. Great to have you with us today.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm really excited to get stuck into this conversation and your journey. When I was doing some of my research, I read online that your background is not typical for a developer. And I thought that's a little bit of an understatement, but let's dive into that and unpack some of that today and some of the lessons that you've learned along the way. So on Development Diaries, we like to start by going back to the start of your career. Could you share with the listeners a little bit more about your early career steps and how you got into the wonderful world of real estate or property in the first place? Was it written in the stars, or were there a few sliding doors moments along the way?
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm often asked this, and it is a bit of a circuitous route, that's for sure. And actually, my older brother was a chief planning officer, and the other brother taught urban design and planning for 35 years. So there's clearly something in our DNA, but arguably more probably something about the way that we were brought up, which was in a suburban part of South Leeds, and at weekends it's quite a kind of banal, if sort of modern housing estate, full of optimism in the sort of post-war era when you've never had it so good, you know, and washing machines and Ford Cortinas and telephones and the first colour TV and all of that. And at weekends, our parents used to drive us in some beat-up old car to really nice places like Richmond and Scarborough and York. And I think there's something about that, it feeling quite glamorous to go to these places that must have lodged in our heads. And at university, I studied geography, and not really one for climbing mountains and walking on glaciers, because it damages your brogues. I studied human and urban geography, and so read Jane Jacobs, Lewis Mumford, Soft City by Jonathan Rayburn, and Social Justice in the City by David Harvey. These are still classics today, actually, in the canon of the future of cities and urbanism. But I never realized that you could do that for a living, as it were. So when I left university, I thought, oh, good. I've got all these ideas and I've read all these books, but I don't really know how to do anything. So I joined the civil service and the fast stream program, and lost the will to live. It was very dull, but also fantastic training, really privileged training, and got into environmental issues, but again thought, what do you do with that? There aren't any jobs in that area. So it was a sort of private passion. And then the Greenpeace job was advertised in The Guardian, obviously in The Guardian. And I applied and got it and absolutely loved it. It was it's one of those moments in life when the light switch goes on. And I found a place, a métier that really suited. It was fast-moving, entrepreneurial, was probably the most powerful NGO in the world in the second half of the 1980s. It was when Mrs. Thatcher really celebrated the environmental movement, gave a speech on ozone and global warming in 1987. Our membership grew from 40,000 to nearly 400,000 in 4 years. And this culminated in me buying a building in Islington to make a new headquarters, because we were growing so quickly and it was time to, kind of get our own place. And we thought, well, it should be a green building. Here we are, Greenpeace. What will people think? But, what was a green building? This was 1989. There was no internet. I'm just showing my age, obviously. There weren't any books written on, green commercial property guidelines. There was no Green Building Council. There was no LEED. There was no, it was all. And so what did you do? And first lesson in real estate is to hire a fantastic team. So we got Field and Clegg Bradley. We got Patrick Bellew, Atelier 10, famous environmental engineer. Early in his career, Neil Thomas, structural engineer. These are world-class. And it was such a delight working with them. So can do. So let's make things. Let's act as if the world had changed, that it really thought that green things in design and building were important. And it was just a transformative experience for me, just that act of doing rather than campaigning, and really suited my character much more. So that was the route in. And after that, Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was the president, I think, Prime Minister of Norway at the time, chaired a famous commission for the United Nations, which defined sustainable development. And then I found the philosophy that seemed to make sense of all the things I believed in. And so, because Greenpeace is an environmentalist organization, not a sustainability organization, I decided to move into sustainability, which is an embrace of social and economic issues in integration with environmental concerns. And environmental problems are not problems of the environment, they're human problems. They're issues that we create through human acts and the human economy. And so I switched my interest back, I suppose, to the original passion in place and cities and urban design. And then had the privilege of working with a really great urban designer in the early noughties. And there was a kind of systematic learning about urbanism and urban places that, put together with an environmental and social worldview, really informed what I've then gone on to do. Very long-winded answer, John. I do apologise.
Well, you've had lots of different chapters in your career, so there is a lot to unpack. So what was it that the process of buying that building and going through the discovery around what makes a green building that kind of started to piece that all together for you, and that's where the property element and the placemaking came back in?
It wasn't so much placemaking then, and it would never have been called that in those days. I think that phrase, in a way, was popularised by the Farrell Review, wasn't it? And whenever that was, 2012, 13. But it was certainly the power, the pleasure in building and making things. That was, I think, the key trigger. And then if you combine that with the fact that Greenpeace was this incredibly powerful organisation and very dynamic, very fast-moving, always in the news, quite sexy, it was an incredible movement to be part of. And that you put that together with making things, and I suppose that's what we're trying to do with human nature, is bring that energy and that zeal and that never say never. And it's not enough to bear witness. We're not oppositional, we're propositional. And making places is about the most propositional thing you can ever do, I think.
Then can you share a little bit more about how your career then progressed into ultimately doing what you're doing now, and maybe some of your proudest achievements and highlights along the way?
Yeah, thank you. If if Brundtland was right and the World Commission for the United Nations was right and sustainable development was the greatest set of issues of our time, this was again 87, you had the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, biggest ever gathering of political and community and business leaders, biggest ever gathering still today. So sustainability was this kind of coming worldview, this way of understanding the world around us and thinking about how we plot a course for the future. The energy in that movement in the late 80s, early 90s was just remarkable. I know people think sustainability is something that we discovered through an ESG policy 4 years ago, but it has that incredible root. And so I thought, well, if these are the greatest issues of our time, we should build a sort of cathedral or a, place that we'd celebrate those ideas. So that's when I started working on the Earth Centre. So I created a foundation. I literally had about £10 in the bank and was living in a little cottage in the Sussex countryside, having moved from our flat in London post Greenpeace. And I thought we're going to create a world centre for sustainability to celebrate what sustainability could be. And we pulled together incredible leaders from business and NGOs and government, created this foundation and advisory board. And it became this landmark Millennium Project, the Earth Centre. And we reclaimed 2 coal mines in South Yorkshire. It was a sort of romantic idea that you could develop this centre in a kind of relic or a place that was coming out of and suffering from the demise of the previous industrial revolution. So what was the next revolution that was coming? And we pioneered a lot of sustainable design, construction, architecture, energy, land remediation, education in sustainability. So I did that for 10 years. I then tried to buy it from the Millennium Commission, who'd largely funded it because it was struggling in that kind of, in the straitjacket of public funding where, in a way, innovation and change and entrepreneurial business is a bit constrained, I think still today, but certainly in those days. And our aim was to create a brand around sustainable business at that point. That led to the creation of Beyond Green, which was a consultancy in all things sustainability. So we made TV programs, books. We did strategic consulting for pension funds, government, the Olympics, big regen projects in Newcastle and Manchester, new communities, some of which are being built now. So Gilston, north of Harlow, that was our original proposal with the King's Foundation. For 25,000 homes. John Prescott loved it, one of his favourite projects. Rugby radio station with Aviva, Manydown in Hampshire, huge new community projects. So we would work with the clients or the landowner and the government body to develop a vision and a plan, deal with the politics and the public stakeholder engagement. And then after that, in my view, lots went wrong. You got this kind of breakdown between vision and action and practice. For all kinds of understandable reasons. No one was saying this stuff was easy. But in the end, we felt that we had to become the principal to be able to make our own huge mistakes by being the owner-driver rather than, as it were, a consultant to other people's. And so, human nature was created from that idea.
Awesome. So bringing a lot of your learnings right at the forefront of this sustainability journey, before and during it even being a concept, taking all those learnings into giving advice, and then ultimately getting a bit frustrated of passing on the advice and thinking, look, if we're that good, we need to back ourselves and do it and make this happen. Which is the path a lot of people take and how they ultimately end up in development as well, actually. So that bit is a bit more typical, but different ways to get there.
It's a bit late in the day John, for me in a sense, but I think, it's a huge privilege to be invited by a community to make a place or remake a place. And I have to say, I think I'm bound to say this given my age, but I think that kind of background and experience and learning helps give you the anchors and the tenacity to be able to do something that's very difficult. To make a sustainable place in modern Britain is a very, very challenging thing. And we can come back to that. I hope we will during the conversation. But so, hopefully all that kind of that kind of background in the theory and campaigning and consulting and even civil service, that understanding of policy and the politics of these things, hopefully it's helpful. I just hope I can live long enough to see some of this new generation of places come to fruition.
Yeah, well, it's all forms part of your legacy as well. Passing on those learnings and leaving others in better place to take it forward too. Appreciate you've kind of had more than one career, I guess, in your time. You've done many different things. They're all kind of intertwined, but in different parts of the kind of industry. Have you ever thought about, if you didn't end up doing this and pursuing the route into what is now human nature, what you might have done instead?
Yeah. Don't we all think about that every day? You come across a particularly challenging planning problem or investment challenge, or you're just super frustrated with the transition from beautiful design into construction, where you go, oh my goodness, isn't there a better way to not just earn a living but live? Look, I love what I do, really, despite all the challenges and frustrations. I really do. I do increasingly enjoy the sort of thinking and writing, and I'm inspired by a number of contemporary writers. The challenge with that is they always write much better than I ever would. And so I get quite cured of that idea every time I sit down to try to write anything more longer than a policy document or a proposal. But I do think I was once invited to become a parliamentary candidate. I won't say which party. And I declined. I was in my early 30s. And I absolutely wouldn't have been right for me, but there's a bit of me now that would just like to get into the radical centre, slightly left-leaning, slightly green, progressive business space, because it doesn't really exist in politics. I feel that it's a missing ingredient, so a little bit rueful about that. But, when I'm reincarnated as a politician, I can regret it then.
Well, it's never too late, I guess. And we'll come back to the challenges of today. And I think the common theme in your career is you've learned into the harder stuff. You've never chosen the easier route. Yeah, I'm sure at times you felt like you've pushed things uphill, which is maybe why you've fantasized about what else you would have done. But where that private and public sector come together is surely key to the whole thing. So maybe we'll touch on that in a little while. Knowing what you know now, having progressed in your career, running your own business, bringing together a scheme that seems like an amazing way to bring everything you've learned together, what would your advice be to the younger Jonathan navigating his early career choices, or further back in his career, deciding what to do and how maybe they've got some of the same passions that you have, and maybe they have some of the same beliefs, but they are feeling that challenge and maybe sometimes wondering, why do I bother? What would your advice be to that person?
Such a hard one, that, isn't it? Because I've got 3 older children, and they've all sort of asked me at various times, Dad, what do you think I should do? What should I study at university? What do I do after university? And it's actually a terribly difficult question, because it's such a personal thing. And so completely by accident, I remember saying to Gabriel, my eldest, when he asked me that, And he was looking at me in a slightly sort of forlorn way, like, I hope you've got the answer to this, Dad. As self-respecting father, you must know the answer. And of course, I was in flat panic, beads of sweat appearing on my forehead, thinking of the responsibility. And all I could find to say, but I think it's the only clever thing I've ever said, was, I don't think it really matters what you do in your 20s, Gabe, but whatever it is that you do it with real intensity. Throw yourself in, learn as much as you can, engage with the people around you. And eventually, by doing that, you'll find the thing that you both love and that suits your talents and interests. And so, you can have 3 or 4 different things. I think it's actually, in a way, unless you're really vocational, really helpful to have 3 or 4 different, and it almost doesn't matter what they are, but you must do it with intensity. You must dig deep and get stuck in. And that's the way you eventually find some sort of sweet spot, I think, between what you love and what you can do tolerably well.
I've seen some people find that through their studies, but the lion's share of people find that later in their career. And for some people, that can take a year or 2. For others, that can take them 20 years. Being brave, putting your hand up, as you say, working with intensity, trying different things, seeing how it all connects, knowing that no decision that you make at that point, even though sometimes it feels like it, in terms of education, is fixed forever. People are really worried about taking a slightly different path, and almost expectation is to know what they want to do from a young age. I agree with you that it doesn't necessarily matter, as long as you're getting the runs on the board, you're picking up the learnings, you're progressing. And, I see people that are super successful, that they've all done that. Slightly more difficult in a modern world where you're working remotely, and technology, makes that learning from others a little bit harder. But there's definitely some really strong lessons in there. So hopefully he was grateful for his dad's advice and went on and ran with that.
Well, he's doing okay. I think the other thing that ideally would run in parallel, I think it's really important to read. When you think about some of the great work, whether it's in organization or business or in politics or culture or literature, you've got these great minds that have applied their lives to developing an expertise and learning in a particular field. And they've taken the trouble so that we don't have to write it down in full sentences and paragraphs and organize that information. So why wouldn't you try and learn from, whether it's, great urban design books or Jane Jacobs? Why wouldn't you read it properly if you were a planner or a developer? Why wouldn't you read Jim Collins if you're in an organization you want to be an entrepreneur, or Peter Drucker or Henry Mintzberg? This stuff is incredible treasure. So while you're throwing yourself intensely into whatever work you're in that moment, that learning can just open your eyes and lift your chin up to these remarkable stories and journeys and concepts. And I think that marriage between practical lived experience and brilliant narratives and histories and perspectives is a wonderful course for anyone.
And it enables you to stand on the shoulders of giants and take that experience back into your today. I think, ironically, if you look at the world now, everything has become a lot more short form. Attention deficit, there's information overload. There's no excuse necessarily for not knowing about a topic, but it's almost gone against some of that longer form. So maybe for that reason, it's even more important that people choose what they feed their brains and what they consume.
Completely. So, in our world, if you think about these cliched words and phrases that are sort of liberally sprinkled around every policy or every project, vibrancy, place, urbanism, sustainability, ESG, have we really thought about what those things are and really debated them and deliberated them? Could most developers or investors in that space or planners really define them by reference to some of the great work in that area. I think it's really important. That is what we do for a living. You know, if we're making places, if we're developers doing anything more than an individual building, I do feel that it's really important to have that kind of study, that learning, to really take it super seriously, because the impact that we have on society and the economy and the future of a safe environment is huge. And therefore we have this kind of responsibility to think very carefully and deliberate around those things, to be as precise as we can be about what we're doing and why we're doing it. I do feel we're a bit of a casual industry in that regard, forgive me.
Yeah, well, I guess when you break it all back, property and places and the built environment is all trying to predict human behavior or human nature, if you like. And sometimes that gets forgotten along the way. You know, we need to provide a return to investors to enable capital to come into the market. But ultimately, people choose where they want to live, work, and play based on how those settings make them feel. And the world's changed a lot in your time in the sector, so you're probably well qualified to answer the question. But what do you think are the skills most needed in today's market when we think about putting together a development, bringing forward regeneration, when we think about building our teams for the challenges that we face today? What do we think is essential?
I think you have to start at first principles. I think you need a theory of change. You need a model. I think that model needs to be robust and properly thought through and crafted. I think you need to have aligned partners, whether that's aligned finance, design and professional team, your agents in particular. I think you need to introduce yourselves with authenticity respectfully to the host community, not just the local members and the officers, but literally in the community. I thought one of the wonderful things about that recent by-election in Gorton was the local candidate was really of that place and had that kind of respect for her neighbours. And so when you're a developer going into a regen project or a big place, the least you can do is to kind of go and say hello properly and say, this is who I am and what I believe and what I do. However difficult that might be, and it often is. Well, in the world I come from, the belief system I have, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that the planet is really struggling because of human action. And so, we're in a dangerous period of climate change that we've triggered. And if you haven't got a bold strategy for that, as well as nature restoration, and I'm not talking a bit of BNG here, I'm talking about whole-scale regeneration of nature. And then if you're not prepared to address social exclusion and poverty in your work, you shouldn't be allowed to be a developer at scale. It's just intrinsically wrong, I think, and therefore taking the trouble to reflect on who we are and what we do and the impact it has is incredibly important before you set out. And I think, clearly, in the world we're in, we do need to make returns for our investors, but I think we've got to be very wary of extractive capital and overpricing our capital. And what that needs is, so I'm obviously extemporizing from your question here, but extrapolating rather. And I think the job of the public sector is to de-risk that innovation, is to provide a context in which if you do that, you're rewarded fairly and reasonably it shouldn't be as risky as it is for good investors and good developers and good communities to do the right thing. And therefore, we need a government landscape and a local politics landscape that encourages innovation, which it's not an optional thing. If we don't innovate and entrepreneurially and bravely with real courage, the idea of any kind of long-term profit from anything is just frankly ridiculous. It's like children at Christmas who want everything today, but we don't care about tomorrow. And we can't be children in the real estate sector is so huge. What is it? The world's greatest assets, the biggest impact on climate, the biggest impact on human behavior ultimately comes from the industry that we're in. And so we have this massive accountability and responsibility. And if short-term profit is the only motivator or the primary motivator, I think that we need to be very wary of that.
So how do we pull it all together? We've touched on a little bit that I think it's fair to say that development's got more difficult over the last 5 to 10 years. Viability is constrained. Capital can be tricky. The UK mood music hasn't necessarily been the most positive of its history, if we can say that. How do we get the balance right? Because I think we've seen with some of these things that should be a priority in terms of the planet and sustainability, some of them have become more nice to have over the last few years. The narrative has changed a little bit, not necessarily in their favor. What do you think is the secret and the things that need to be lobbied for and unlocked to make more of this long-term regeneration and placemaking possible?
Yeah, well, it's a huge question, isn't it, John? I think the starting point is accepting the world as it is rather than as we would prefer it to be. So you accept that there's a climate crisis and that the word crisis has a meaning. And so mitigation and adaptation in a very bold way is an imperative. It's not a choice. You accept the same in regard to nature, habitat restoration on a grand scale. And I would, if you're interested in sustainability, you have to embrace the social aspect, because unless you bring people with you, you've got no chance of making those changes for climate and nature. And so, we have to have strong models of participation and involvement and address poverty and public health in a really, really serious way. So if that's your starting point, is that framing? And if you frame it then in that way, as government and business and investors, as developers and communities, we've then got the best chance ever in history to innovate and create a better economy and a better world. That once you accept the scale of these challenges, it forces us to be incredibly creative and long-term and form new alliances between capital and doing and communities and people and place, unlike we've seen before. So once at senior government level, we see the potential in this to be the opportunity for the greatest innovation that humanity has seen, rather than a threat. The threat is real. It's clear and present danger. No getting away from it. So let's accept that. And now what are we going to do? And so government needs to learn to say no to crass, banal, short-termist development. And we need to find a way to tune capital, to reward capital from doing the good things. And those good things are, using neighbourhood as a template to regrow community and strengthen community, to reinforce economic productivity, which, most people confuse with doing the same things better when it's actually about doing better things, to drive that innovation and that change. I think we need to move to active travel, walking and cycling and essentially public transport. We clearly need to bring in batteries and renewable energy and invest in the grid. I think Labour are doing a great job in that regard, by the way. We need to build essentially in bio-based materials and stone until we've found the technology for green concrete and steel. We just haven't innovated with it yet. People confuse innovation with science. scientifically, we know how to do a lot of this stuff. We just haven't got the policies and the economic frameworks, the investment frameworks to innovate. That can change quickly once we've learned to say no, because we're an ingenious species. And the City of London is about as ingenious as it gets, finding new clever financial frameworks and structures and funding to enable these things to happen. So look, it's a world of possibility and change that there is another England, there is another Britain, and I think there's something about excuse me, what's happening in the world right now, which might just be perpetual volatility, where we have to look to ourselves and go, how do we strengthen our communities in the face of these global challenges, which somehow feel out of control? And for me, making places and remaking places, working with communities and great investors is about the best thing you can do in that agenda, and potentially really good business.
So when you lay it all out, it sounds like a win-win-win. And is it just that, what's the hardest part of all of this? Is it public sector and the government being able to think long-term enough? Is it investors now having been burnt a few times and deciding that they need short-term returns to ask for more money? Is there one thing you can pin it to, or is that too difficult a question?
I think you pretty much said it for me. I think there isn't one thing, but I think you need the entrepreneurs, you need the mad people, you need the human natures, the towns, the civic squares, we can make that. You need the igloos, the planets, the people that are out there. Argent back in the day. You need these people who just see another world, have a very clear vision, know why they're doing it, and you just have to try and drive whatever the resistance. And eventually, it's a Greenpeace thing, eventually you get a kind of critical mass of people and you cross a threshold, a tipping point in the cliche, where it becomes a sort of, oh yeah, that's how you do it. That's how you make places. That's how you create real value economically, not just in... So for instance, one of the things that we're working on over the medium term is to make neighbourhoods a new asset class, where by doing virtuous things in a neighbourhood, you make them more attractive to everyone. If you're selling, the absorption rate is higher, maybe you get a premium price, you attract better investors, you design and build more resilient, long life, adaptable product, buildings, homes. You develop local services that then improve the quality of life of people living there. More people want to live there, values increase, but not in a way you've got to be careful of the affordability, because it sounds like a sort of gentrification bourgeois trap potentially. So you've got to move with that at the same time. And therefore, anyone investing in a sort of BTR, co-living, affordable housing, later living, 10-year specific thing on a forward funding deal knows that their asset's going to perform better. So why wouldn't you invest in the other things that make that asset improve better? And that is the overall place in the neighbourhood. So what we're aiming for as our portfolio grows is to turn, well, we've got two main typologies of place. One we call villages, which is smaller housing schemes that help make an existing small town or village sort of better, more integrated, more coherent, more spatially connected, more vibrancy, and then urban neighborhoods. And each of those as potential assets. So you have a strategic investor that goes, I get that. I get that if we create climate resilient, beautiful, walkable, social places with good buildings built for long life, that's bound to be a good investment in anyone's world. Doesn't mean there aren't short-term difficulties with that, or you've got to face down the planners sometimes, or sometimes on policy. is weirdly a laggard in this regard. But once you break through that barrier and that thesis is proven, and actually, you know, Argent did that at King's Cross. If you ask Roger Madlin or any of those guys originally why King's Cross worked, it wasn't because of a rational red book analysis done at the beginning, because that would tell you never, ever even to go there, let alone invest hundreds of millions of pounds. But they had a clear vision about what that area could become. And look at the values there. If you just think of it in a capitalist investment mode, that's an incredible thing to do. Does it also improve a city? Does it also improve the quality of life for people that visit there? Absolutely. So imagine if you're doing that for most neighbourhoods in Britain or most villages. What a way of regenerating Britain and our economy.
Yeah, and David Partridge was actually episode 1 of Development Diaries. We talked a little bit about Argent's early work with King's Cross, Brindley Place, you know, the pioneers. And you know, I think you've probably highlighted one of the challenges that we face, which is, you know, that a lot of these things are hard to measure in terms of a number. And if we're running real estate through Excel, what do you put in that cell? It needs to be a number, but lots of these things are a feeling or a marginal gain, or, you know, you're talking about wanting to be in a place, wanting to stay in a place, paying a premium or staying in that place more, which is a win-win for capital and for the council and for the local jurisdiction and local businesses and everything. But how do you measure that? You know, thinking of where I live, we talk a lot with other parents about how could we make the place better? How can we build a community hub? How can we take over the local cafe and make it a bit more family friendly? Those things that actually at a granular level, I think most people understand. And that's why we choose. You know, you choose where to live based on how it makes you feel, and security and community and schooling and all of the above. But how would I measure any of that? How do I measure sentiment?
Well, it's what the world is based on, actually, at the end of the day. It is human nature, to borrow your phrase from earlier on. I think that you need a marriage, don't you, between very big capital, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, government enabling funding, significant strategic investment, but you also need that kind of groundswell from the grassroots in communities like Civic Square or, you know, Melissa Mean's work in Bristol, where you're working with local people to learn how to build and use local materials. And, you know, so that combination of capital and expertise and then local know-how and participation is critical. And then the issue becomes whose balance sheet benefits, because clearly I think what happens in the end, and it's a real conundrum for Britain, is that because we don't really invest in great places, we invest in development, and we don't really care where it is or what it is that the cost of that comes back on the public in the end. And therefore it's bad accounting, it's bad business, it's bad for the economy, it's bad for society. Whereas if we build well and make whole places, the externalities, and I don't just mean climate change and nature, which are the biggest, by the way, which are causing huge costs around the world, and it will get much, much worse. But I actually mean literally the cost of things. People's driving, having to drive to go to the shops or the hospital or to work, rather than being able to walk or cycle or catch. These are huge costs in economic productivity. Building with the wrong materials sort of prevents the innovation needed for bio-based, mass-engineered, off-site manufacture. There's a whole massive economy in how we build in a sustainable way that's waiting to be born. And there are some really great pioneers, but it's nowhere near mainstream yet. But when it is, the economic benefits for the wider economy are going to be vast. So I'll come back to my point. Productivity is about doing better things, not just doing the same things better. And we need to embrace that together with that kind of entrepreneurial and strategic perspective.
I think that all feeds nicely into what you're spending your 24 hours a day on at the moment. So for those that are less familiar with human nature and the business and the mission and the Phoenix, could you give a little bit of an overview of what's the current priority, what you're working on, and what you're most excited about over the next few years?
Yeah, thank you. We've got three things, I suppose. One is the Phoenix itself, which is our sort of flagship urban neighbourhood project. I live in Lewes. My wife is from there. Her grandfather was mayor 4 times. This brownfield site on the edge of the town centre has been semi-derelict for 20 years. 2 developers have had a go before. It's an incredible site in a national park. It's the biggest ever development in a UK national park. It's proper classic gritty urban brownfield stuff. But it is very well connected with the town centre. It's on the edge of a conservation area. It's in an area that floods. It's got a tidal river. You've got views of the downs in every direction. You've got the countryside on one edge and you've got the town centre on the other edge. So what a wonderful place to make a place. Lewes itself is a stunning historic town on hills in the South Downs. Thomas Paine lived there for a while. It has a history of radicalism. It's got this kind of fantastically anarchistic bacchanalian bonfire night. People in Lewes love a kind of celebration and dressing up and a kind of protest and an irreverent expression. So then enter stage left this mad idea to create a neighbourhood of the future, which is weirdly like the old bit of Lewes, because that old model of urbanism, walkable streets, fine-grained plots within blocks, enhancing views of the surrounding landscape, building in materials that come from the landscape, making a social place where different tenures and income groups are mixed together, adding in 21st century technology and management models for estate management and renewable energy and energy efficiency, co-mobility, access to electric vehicles, access to electric cargo bikes, put that into a blend, build a financial model around it, make God laugh a few times, have a massive battle in planning. Even when the planners are very sympathetic to the idea, you still have a massive battle because they've never seen anything like this before. It's a bit like Maoris spearfishing in New Zealand, seeing Captain Cook's ship arrive on the horizon and sort of looking at it and not realizing what it was and just carrying on spearfishing. It's sort of, sorry, that was a bit of an unusual metaphor, but it's that sort of, is it too good to be true? Do they mean this? Is this a proper development? Can it work? Will people actually walk and cycle in a town centre? Well, can you build in engineered timber? Can you mix tenures in a block? Will people use a shared courtyard, or does every Britain person need a massive private garden? Will anyone talk to anyone else in a place? These are all sorts of preconceptions and prejudices that a project like this has to deal with. We're right in we're at the end of the planning phase of that, as it were. We're now in the sort of investment phase and we're getting practically ready to deliver it. And so people can say, well, if you can't prove that it will work, I can't support it. Well, I can't prove it. I can't prove it. You can't prove innovation. I remember a head of a highways division once on a project telling me, he said, Jonathan, we designed a kind of winding country lane up a valley to hold together 3 new villages in this sensitive valley. And they wanted a big straight road that could take big buses to go right through the middle of it. And I was like, that will destroy the whole sensitivities to this beautiful landscape. And he said, Jonathan, we love your vision, but before we allow you to innovate at our expense, you need to prove to me that it will work. And I was like, that's an oxymoron. By definition, you can't. You just got to. You've got to see. Is there an evidence base? Are there some precedents? do we need to do this stuff for climate, nature, community, economic productivity? And you then go, if you're public sector, in any part of the public sector or an investor, you go, right, how do you need me to lean in to help us realize this vision? Because it's so important to make these kinds of projects happen. How can we help you to do that? And so that's where we are with the Phoenix. The second thing we're working on is we're now taking that thinking into a village setting. We were asked by the leader of a local council the deal's not quite done, so I can't name it yet, but it won't be long, I think, to do a rural version of this for a small village to show how you can make a village whole by doing development and offering an alternative to the kind of executive housing model with 2 cars parked on a handkerchief lawn outside the front door. Is there a better way? Is there an inherently sustainable way of making a new development in a village in a small town? We're working on that. And then the third thing is we're working on a strategic fundraise where we're bringing together what we call mission guardians. It's far-sighted investors and family officers and major foundations that believe in this vision and commit to the strategic funding to enable us to take our models and express them over a much bigger platform and portfolio. So we've been doing a lot of work on the platform. You know, what are the typologies? What's the brand? How do you build the future customer awareness and loyalty? We've got 6 other quite major projects that we're scoping at the moment to work on. So to do a lot of it is legal expenses, is to do the legals to get the right agreements so that this model can then become a very significant player in the, I suppose, you know, we aim to mainstream what sounds like mad thinking, but of course it isn't really mad thinking. It just seems a bit mad in relation to what people think is possible in the here and now. And I'm like going, it doesn't matter whether you think it's possible, we have to do it. That's the mentality. So I hope in some way that human nature's learning and its experience, all the hard knocks, the setbacks, the difficulties, but also the small triumphs become useful in some way. That's all you can hope for.
Yeah, and I guess going back to your point around that kind of skepticism where you sitting there confident that you're going to help a location, you know, talking of the Phoenix, you know, what's there now versus what it could be. Sounds like an absolute no-brainer. However, you're still met with skepticism. You know, maybe it's because they've been let down before. Maybe it's, you know, fear of the unknown. Maybe it's, you know, sometimes people get fired for taking a risk and a bit of self-preservation. None of it is easy, but when you break it down, it just kind of completely makes sense. So hopefully there's some people listening to this that are nodding along and thinking, yes, you know, it is our responsibility as an industry to do more of this. But no innovation ever happened by someone just doing the same thing that we've always done. I'd be delighted if some of the listeners got in touch with you off the back of this and said, look, I'm in some capacity, be that as a supporter, cheerleader. You know, as an industry, I think we need to do more to have a collective voice to get in front of policymakers, because often that can be well thought through, but not necessarily fully joined up with the realities of being on the ground. And they all often don't even speak to each other that clearly. No, so thanks for sharing all that. What would be success for you over the next few years? What are you most excited about? And if we sat down and recorded this in 3 years' time, what would you have done that means that you know, your legacy has taken a step further towards reality?
Well, it's nice of you to put it in those terms. Legacy is a very big word. Look, I think we have a little catchphrase in human nature, which is that there's a far, far better world, but it needs to be seen to be believed. And it's this, you know, imagination always precedes political change. And what we're aiming to do with human nature's portfolio is create a series of exciting projects that are really boldly pursuing the power of place to shape quality of life for everyone really immediately in their everyday sense while addressing these global issues. And and just by starting those projects releases a kind of hope out there. Not to sound too hippie about it, but hopefully when you walk down a street in the Phoenix in say 4 years' time, I kind of want people, I want their shoulders to drop. I want a smile to appear on their lips and just say, this is nice. I like this. I don't want them to be wowed. I don't need them to say how wonderful it is. I just want people to walk around there and gradually relax into it and feel the social interaction and the quality of the entrances and the corners and the attention to detail and the greenery, smell the timber in the buildings, and just a kind of sensuous experience and go, I really like this. This is what we should do. Or some of this is what we should do. So if we can create a portfolio of projects with serious strategic financial backing to make more of those, I'll be very surprised and completely thrilled.
And that leads on to word of mouth and recommendations, and a lot of the places that we recommend as humans, be that restaurant, somewhere to go, open spaces, different cities that we've traveled to. Can't always tell someone why you'd recommend it other than you'd recommend it. So maybe that's the feeling they're looking for. It's just a really nice place.
One of the things, so if you look at, say, Lewis Mumford's History of Cities, or you think about Jane Jacobs' work, you think about your favourite places in the world, particularly if they're towns and cities, they're often very similar, actually. There are some rules to what works for human beings. It's no accident why we like older places. Not to be too nostalgic about it, but these walkable, quite compact, intimate spaces, they just cheer you up. People pay a lot of money to go and visit these places, and I'm a bit like, why don't we just make them in real life, as it were? So it's more like almost like bringing back some of those models and those ideas. In some ways, you can call it the extraordinary, because these are things that we used to be very good at. And I think that in a way, the car has enabled cities to sprawl and become disparate, and communities to be thinned out. And we need to rebuild that social connection, I think, through places. It's one of the most powerful things we can do.
So in the interest of passing on the baton, when you do hang up your pen and paper eventually, hopefully a long time from now, Chris Fleetwood, who was the guest from Redevco on the last episode, left you a question to answer, which was, how as an industry do we shine a light on the opportunities that are available in the built environment to those that are at school to attract the top talent from all parts of society? Now, I know we've touched on a lot of the reasons why the sector can be amazing and drive change, but from your view, what needs to be done better, more of? How do we inspire the next generation?
Well, I read once that in Silicon Valley, when you've got these businesses that pay these extraordinary salaries, how do they attract the most talented people beyond the salaries? Because the salaries are high in whichever of those big companies you're working in. And it's who's got the most audacious ambition. And I think we need that in real estate. I actually don't think we attract the most talented people. I think they go into other sectors. And I think what we need to do is that if we have an honest conversation with ourselves and society, and we say, how do we turn these profound, dangerous challenges of climate, nature, and social division, and the positive grasp of economic productivity, combine those together, and how do we turn those, see them, and then act to turn them into the greatest challenges of humankind? If we can have that as our audacious mission as an industry, watch young people come and join us, because we need their energy, their creativity, the best talents, the best morals, the best financiers. So we want those young people in this space, but we've got to make it inviting and welcoming. We've got to give them something to believe in, and then open up our organizations to their energy and their creativity, and drop the cynicism.
Yeah, I'd see younger generations being even more driven by purpose and starting with why. So connecting what the industry can do for some of those major challenges and how it can become part of the solution. And maybe it does, maybe as an industry, we do have a bit of an ambition crisis and a little bit of a identity crisis. So it'd be nice to see more people in a collective message on all of those fronts. And yeah, we'll have a better chance of steering them into our camp. Thanks for that. That's a tough one to answer. I think you've done well to answer it so succinctly. And in return for answering someone else's question, would you like to leave a question for the next guest, not knowing who that'll be just yet?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. John Holdren, who was one of Obama's key scientific advisors, penned a really smart phrase. He said that sustainability is a series of great opportunities designed or perceived as insoluble problems. And that's the thesis that I've been trying to argue in this interview, is that when you grasp them, they're the greatest opportunities we've ever had in our economy and in society to create positive change. So my question for your next guest is, how do we transform innovation in our space? What would we need to do? And I don't mean gradual incremental evolution. That will happen anyway, but we need a transformative step change in our ability to innovate in every part of the real estate and placemaking sector. How do we do that?
Nice, easy one for the next guest to answer then. Well, thank you, Jonathan. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you today. As you know, I'm a big fan of a lot of the messages that you put out there, the fact that you're willing to fight against the headwinds, to keep pushing forward. I know none of it is easy, as we've touched on a few of the reasons why. I'm really excited to see what you and the team go on to do over the next few years. Maybe we'll record a part 2.
Oh, thank you, John. Look, if it's come across as a kind of a struggle or it's all too difficult, I don't always feel like that. I feel, actually, I really love what I do. As I said, it's very positive, and the touch points with people in communities are often incredible. So I can't recommend that struggle highly enough.
Yeah, was there anything easy worth doing? Well, no, thank you for hanging out with us today, and we'll catch up soon.
Cheers, John. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode. Your support means the world. Please feel free to like, share, or pass the podcast on to a friend or colleague. Do drop me a line with any suggested topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes and recommendations of guests that you would love to see us interview. Until next time, go well.